The first human had not set foot on their world in 105 cycles. And by the time I arrived, the very idea of a man had become something between myth and warning. My descent pod burned through the violet clouds like a falling star, and I could feel the weight of countless eyes long before I saw them. The landing planes were silent in the way only a hunted place could be, stretched wide and bare, marked by old scars where cities once stood. My scanners screamed unfamiliar life signs, dense clusters moving fast, circling rather than approaching. That alone told me this was not a welcoming world. They emerged from the stone ridges at dusk, tall and lean, skin patterned like cracked obsidian, eyes reflecting the low sun with predatory intelligence. The tribe had survived a century without males, and in that time, their culture had sharpened into something ruthless and efficient. Men, according to their preserved histories, were unstable, violent, and dangerously adaptable. The last human envoy had vanished after 3 days, and his disappearance had been recorded not as a tragedy, but as a necessary correction. When they saw me, my broader frame, my unmasked face, my unmistakable biology, the tension snapped like a drawn wire. Weapons were raised, though they were not tools of metal and fire. They carried bone-edged spears and living restraints that twitched as if hungry. I raised my hand slowly, letting my helmet retract, exposing myself in the universal language of vulnerability. It only excited them. Hunger and curiosity mixed on their faces, not just for flesh, but for proof. They wanted to see if the stories were true, if a human male was truly as dangerous as legend claimed, or if time had finally eroded the threat we once posed. They advanced in a tightening ring, voices clicking in low, coordinated rhythms. I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the ancient human response that had once terrified entire sectors of space. My mind raced through options, through worst-case scenarios, through the knowledge that I was standing alone on a world that had already decided my fate. And yet, beneath the fear, there was something else. Resolve, the same stubborn refusal to lie down and die that had carried humanity through extinction events. Wars, and stars that wanted us dead. When the first spear lunged, I moved without thinking. I caught it, twisted, and snapped the shaft with a strength they did not expect. Gasps rippled through the circle. In that single moment, I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. Not fear yet, but recognition. The realization that the absence of men for a century had not made them safer. It had only made them forget what survival truly looked like. I did not come to conquer their world. I did not come to be a monster from their myths. But as I stood there, surrounded and unyielding, I understood the truth they were about to learn the hard way. The first human in a century was not a mistake. Letting me live or trying to kill me would be. A century without men had reshaped the world in ways no off-world historian could have predicted. When I began to understand their language and their records, it became clear that the absence was not accidental, nor was it mourned. The alien tribe had made a deliberate choice generations ago, driven by a catastrophe that blamed male aggression for the near collapse of their civilization. What followed was not chaos, but a brutal efficiency. Leadership became centralized under matriarchal councils. Reproduction was regulated through controlled genetic archives, and anything associated with uncontrolled strength or emotional volatility was systematically erased from culture and memory. Survival became sacred, but not in the way humans understood it. They built cities designed for defense rather than growth, sprawling low across the terrain, camouflaged and hardened. Art vanished first, then exploration. Curiosity was reframed as risk, and risk as weakness. Without men, physical conflict diminished, but so did adaptability. Every problem was solved through caution, delay, and overwhelming consensus. It worked for a time. They endured plagues, environmental collapse, and external threats by refusing to change unless forced. The cost was invisible to them, hidden behind stability and long, uneventful years. The wilds beyond their settlements told a different story. Predators grew bolder. Ecosystems shifted in unpredictable ways, without the disruptive force that once drove innovation and reckless solutions. Nature began to reclaim ground. The tribe responded by retreating further inward, tightening rules, narrowing acceptable behavior. Children were taught obedience before creativity, restraint before courage. Strength was tolerated only when controlled, passion only when useful. Over generations, their species became efficient survivors but poor fighters, worse explorers, and terrible improvisers. When I arrived, I could feel the fragility beneath their confidence. Their weapons were elegant but specialized, their tactics flawless on paper and brittle in reality. They had optimized survival for a world that no longer existed. Every system assumed the enemy would behave logically, predictably, and within established parameters. Humanity never did. We survived precisely because we were chaotic, emotional, and often foolish enough to try when logic said we should fail. They believed the absence of men had saved them, and in many ways, it had. It had given them peace, longevity, and order. But peace without challenge had dulled their instincts. Longevity without struggle had weakened their urgency. Order without disruption had made them slow to react when the universe changed its rules. Standing among them, I realized their greatest mistake was not the choice they made a century ago. It was believing that survival alone was victory. They had forgotten that life does not merely endure, it adapts. It risks, and sometimes it breaks itself just to see what happens next. And that, more than any weapon, was what humanity had always brought to the stars. They had always believed themselves to be the hunters. For generations, the tribe ruled their territory through calculated dominance, culling threats before they could grow and consuming anything that wandered too close to their borders. Outsiders were studied, categorized, and neutralized with chilling efficiency. By the time I understood how their world worked, I also understood that my arrival had triggered instincts they thought they had perfected. I was not seen as a person, or even an enemy. I was prey rare, dangerous prey, but prey all the same. The first attempt was subtle. Drones disguised as native fauna shadowed my movements, mapping my habits, tracking my vitals through the faint electromagnetic noise of my gear. When that failed to yield a clean opportunity, they escalated. Traps appeared overnight, elegant and nearly invisible, designed to incapacitate without destroying what they intended to study. I avoided some by chance, others by instinct, and a few only because I had learned long ago that when a place feels safe, it almost never is. Each failure irritated them, not with rage, but with disbelief. Prey was not supposed to adapt this quickly. The confrontation came at dawn, when the light was weakest and their confidence strongest. A hunting party surrounded my camp in perfect silence, their movements synchronized, their weapons aimed for non-lethal precision. They expected panic, resistance measured and predictable. Instead, they met exhaustion sharpened into focus. When the first net flew, I rolled, tore free, and charged toward the only gap in their formation. It was not bravery. It was momentum, the human tendency to turn fear into forward motion. The battle was short, messy, and deeply unsettling for them. Their training emphasized restraint, efficiency, and minimal loss. Mine had emphasized survival under impossible odds. I fought dirty, used broken terrain as a weapon, and turned their own traps against them. One by one, their hunters fell not dead, but stunned, injured, confused by a prey that refused to behave like prey. I could see it in their eyes as they retreated. Not fear yet, but something far worse. Uncertainty. News traveled fast. By nightfall, I was no longer referred to as a specimen or an anomaly. I was a variable, a problem that could not be solved through established doctrine. The tribe had spent a century refining the art of the hunt, perfecting control over a predictable environment. They had forgotten what it felt like when the hunted fought back, adapted faster, and learned from every mistake. In trying to devour me, they had exposed the flaw at the heart of their dominance. Hunters who never face true resistance eventually forget how fragile power really is. And once that illusion breaks, it is only a matter of time before the roles reverse. Fear among the matriarchs did not come as screams or panic. It came as silence, In the great council chambers, carved deep beneath their capital, the leaders listened as reports filtered in clinical, precise, and increasingly difficult to explain away. A single human had disrupted patrol routes, neutralized trained hunters, and survived encounters that should have ended in capture. None of this aligned with the carefully preserved narratives about men, especially human men. Those stories painted us as dangerous, yes, but ultimately flawed, impulsive, and self-destructive. What stood before them now was something far more troubling. They studied recordings of my movements frame by frame. Where they expected chaos, they saw endurance. Where they expected reckless aggression, they found calculated persistence. I did not strike hardest or fastest. I lasted. I kept moving when exhaustion should have crippled me. Injuries that would have sidelined one of their own became inconveniences I worked around. To a species that valued efficiency above all else, this kind of stubborn durability was alien in the truest sense. The matriarchs began to understand that human strength was not rooted in superior weapons or raw physical power alone. It was psychological. We were shaped by failure, by environments that punished hesitation and rewarded adaptation. A century of peace had allowed their society to refine systems, but it had also shielded them from attrition. They avoided loss so effectively that they no longer knew how to function when loss occurred. Watching me operate without support, without certainty, and without the option of retreat forced them to confront a truth they had buried. Survival without hardship breeds fragility. What unsettled them most was not what I could do, but what I represented. I was proof that chaos could coexist with purpose, that emotion could fuel resilience rather than undermine it. Human endurance was not clean or elegant. It was inefficient, painful, and relentless. We endured hunger, fear, and injury not because it was optimal, but because giving up simply did not register as an acceptable outcome. That mindset had carried us through extinctions and into the stars, and now it stood in stark contrast to their carefully managed existence. By the time they considered opening formal dialogue, the fear had already taken root. Not fear of invasion or conquest, but of exposure. If one human could reveal such cracks in their worldview, what would happen if more arrived? If trade, conflict, or cooperation forced them to confront a species that thrived on adversity? The matriarchs realized then that their greatest threat was not humanity's violence, but its refusal to break. They had ruled for a century without men, believing endurance could be engineered and controlled. Watching a human simply endure had shown them how wrong they were. The moment the ancient order began to collapse was not marked by fire or bloodshed, but by hesitation. For the first time in generations, the tribe did not know which protocol to follow. Their systems had been designed to eliminate uncertainty. Yet my presence introduced a kind of chaos they could not quantify. I was no longer just a threat to be neutralized or a curiosity to be contained. I had become a decision they could not avoid, and every possible choice carried consequences they had not prepared for. The council argued in controlled tones, but beneath their calm was fracture. Some believed I should be destroyed immediately, before my continued survival inspired doubt among the populace. Others insisted that killing me would validate the very myths they had worked so hard to suppress, that men were forces of disruption who could not be reasoned with. A third faction, smaller but growing, saw opportunity. They wondered what might be learned from a species that endured through disorder rather than eliminating it. Consensus, once their greatest strength, became a weapon turned inward. While they debated, change spread. Reports of my encounters circulated despite attempts at suppression. Hunters spoke quietly of mistakes made, of prey that learned, adapted, and refused to break. Younger members of the tribe began asking forbidden questions, not about men, but about the past. Why had exploration ended? Why had risk been erased from their culture? Why did survival feel increasingly like stagnation? The ancient order had relied on control and certainty, but curiosity is a contagion that thrives in cracks. The choice, when it finally came, was meant to be decisive. I was summoned to the capital under a banner of negotiation, escorted through corridors that had not hosted an outsider in 100 years. Every step was a test not just of me, but of them. To execute me would restore the old balance. To imprison me would delay the inevitable. To listen would change everything. The weight of that realization pressed heavier than any weapon. When I spoke, I did not threaten. I did not promise conquest or alliance. I simply told them what humanity had learned the hard way. That order alone does not ensure survival. And peace without challenge eventually becomes decay. I told them that adaptation requires friction. That resilience is born from failure. And that choosing safety over growth is still a choice with consequences. They listened not because I was powerful, but because their own history echoed in my words. The collapse came quietly after that. Traditions loosened. Exploration proposals resurfaced. Training doctrines changed, introducing uncertainty back into their simulations. The ancient order did not fall in a single night. It unraveled as people chose differently, one decision at a time. All it took was one arrival and one moment where the wrong choice would have been easier. They had ruled for a century through control and consensus. It took one human, one choice, and the courage to face uncertainty for their world to begin transforming again.